Hey folks, John here, Old Hickory Forge. Welcome back for part 3 and hopefully the final part in the Viking sword series. Here's where we left off. Blade's been rough ground, all the fittings are done, handle's just about ready. All that's left to do is heat treat, temper it, finish, grind it, get it sharp, and assemble the handle. If all goes well, this should be a relatively quick process. So let's go take a look at our heat treat setup. So, to heat treat the sword, I've broken out my old 3-burner atmospheric forge because it's a little easier to heat a large area at once. Got a couple of pieces of angle iron in there to kind of rest the sword vertically. If you lay it flat, the weight of the sword kind of makes it want to warp. I found out with my last one. So there's that. Over here, we got an old tank ammo tube. I sealed up the bottom of for about 5 gallons of vegetable oil. That's what we're going to be quenching in. So fingers crossed everything goes well. So first thing that's going to happen is obviously the sword has to be normalized 3 times. So I have to heat up one end, then flip it around and heat up the other, and then slowly paint the heat back and forth until I get an even enough heat on the whole thing. Can't believe I used to work in this thing. I've really been spoiled by my ribbon burner. See what I mean? Just kind of pulling the sword back and forth through the fire, trying to get the heat nice and even. I'll slow down a little bit on the areas that need it a little bit more. So, this is the final heat before the quench. So really taking my time, making sure it's hot enough all the way across, all the way even. All right, whole thing's nice and cherry red, still orangish, about 1500 degrees. This is where the sword gets its soul if all goes well. Didn't feel any cracks, so that's good. Wow. She's dead straight, too. As straight as she was when she went in. There's a little bit of a wave in part of the edge, but that was there beforehand. Ladies and gentlemen, she is dead straight. Straight as she was anyway. There's a little wave kind of in the middle of the blade just from the differences in the grind. But that was there before and that'll grind out, so I'm not worried about it. Check it with a file. Oh yeah. She's glass hard all the way up and down. I was worried it might not have hardened well back here, but that's definitely hard. We're not out of the woods yet. It's still, the sword is still cooling and it still could potentially crack, but, you know, the worst part's over. So, now it's time to just knock the scale off the sword so I can see some true metal to temper it. At this point, the sword is very, very brittle, so I'm handling it very carefully. If you drop it, it could shatter or crack. So, I've got my contact wheel on here. I'm just going to go over the fuller really quick to knock the scale off. Not really trying to remove a lot of material. Clean up the flats a little bit. There's still a lot of material to remove here, so I'm not too worried about if I screw up my lines right now. There's plenty of time to true them up. But anyway, let's get that done. So, knocked off a good bit of the scale. Now it's just time to go ahead and temper this baby. I'm going to start back here at the tang. Heat the tang up to like blue or black or so. I want to make sure this is completely soft. Then I'll start putting heat into the fullers of the blade. I want blue running down the middle of the blade and straw or so on the edges. Slowly working my way up the blade. So, the colors didn't really want to run the way I wanted them. It's hard to see because the sun's hitting it, but I got about a bronze on the whole blade. But what tempering does is it makes the blade less brittle, so now I can grab it down here and I can turn it every which way without worrying about snapping it. So it makes the sword more flexible and stronger. Here's a better look over here out of the direct sunlight. You see we got blue, purple down here where the sword's under the most stress. So it's nice and flexible, but it should hold an edge pretty good. So here we are after the temper. The sword is looking pretty good. Now it's time to finish grind it, bring it down to its final thickness, final weight, get it sharpened and everything and polished up. So, good bit of work to do and the steel's already hard, so I've got a good sharp 36 grit belt on my grinder. I'm just going to use the contact wheel to hog off material. Just slowly bring everything down to where it needs to be. It's you know, it's kind of a slow, long process, but you'll be done before you know it. So, the sword's shaping up. I've got the fuller polished all the way up through 320 grit. That's where I'm going to leave it. So then we've got the bevels down about about half a thickness of a dime or so. Now, next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and start creating what's going to be the cutting edge. I want a convex grind on this sword. So what I'm going to do, until now I've been grinding flat against the platen at the same angle kind of. I'm going to tilt in slightly to get kind of a stout cutting edge. And then what I'll do is take it to the slack of the belt, blend it all together, and that should give me a nice sharp edge and make the sword easier to polish. Whenever you're really hogging off material like this, it's also important to keep the sword cool to keep from damaging your temper. So what I've got here is a little pitcher. And every so often I'll just dunk the tip in my bucket of water and pour some of this over it to keep it cool. That's another reason you shouldn't wear gloves when you grind it, so you can feel the sword getting hot. But anyway, let's get this thing sharp. So, I've got the whole sword grind up to 220 grit. Now it's just time to polish it and give it the nice satin finish. What I'm using for that, this is a pretty cool tool. It's like a little Scotch-Brite wheel you put in your drill. I bought it for polishing up hammer faces, but it works good for this. Just one thing you want to make sure of is that it's turning so that if it grabs the sword and throws it because the clamps come loose, it'll throw it away from you, not towards you. So, just going to carry this thing over the whole sword, get a nice finish. Also be careful to avoid the edges because this thing can kind of chew them up a little bit and they still need to be honed, so take your time. So at this point the blade itself is pretty much done. What I've got here is just a 6,000 grit honing belt on my work sharp knife and tool sharpener. This will accomplish pretty much the same thing that stropping the blade by hand would do. It's a big blade and doing that would take forever, and I can't be bothered to do that. So I'm just slowly going to work my way up, knocking the burr off that edge. So, now it's time to assemble the sword, so I've got it chucked up in my vise with a piece of scrap leather to keep from marring up the blade. Got my handle block full of epoxy. Make sure that's the right way. It's not. It only mates up with the guard one way. There we go. I'll put these here fittings on. Now with how tight that fits and how much it all presses forward, there's no need for clamps. All the fittings are rock solid. So I'm just going to let that set up. When it's done, we'll cut off the excess and then heat the exposed part of the tango up and paint it over. Then all that's left is to wrap the handle. So we're getting pretty close to this thing actually being a sword. Last thing I got to do to assemble it is heat up the exposed bit of the tang and paint it over. So very last thing I'm going to do to the sword is wrap the handle. So I got some brown leather here. I went ahead and burned it a little bit while I had the torch out. That way if I accidentally leave a gap, there's not a huge white chunk of maple staring me in the face. So just going to dab on some super glue. And start wrapping the handle. Nothing to it really. I just want to be careful not to bind or kink the leather. I feel like that won't look good, so I'm going to take my time, go real slow like. So, just keeping at it. It's slow going, but I don't want to spend all this time making this sword just to screw up the handle wrap, so I'm taking my time. So, everybody, here she is. See the tang's peened over real nice. All the fittings are rock solid. I got my maker's mark right there on the pommel. Room for strength, room for love. Blade came out right at 31 inches. The weight came out at 3.3 pounds or 1,500-ish grams, which is actually about 50 grams lighter than my first sword. I don't know if you can get them both in frame, but this sword, the blade is about 5 inches longer and the handle's about an inch and some odd longer. But as you can see, like I was talking about, I'm trying to like not hit my lights or anything, but I can swing it much further without the pommel hitting my wrist now. That's why I wanted kind of a longer handle. It's still clearly a one-handed sword, but I have a little more mobility with it. But all in all, I'm happy with the way it came out. But anyway, let's cut some stuff. So, While I was waiting for the epoxy on this thing to set, I went to the store and grabbed an expired watermelon, so don't get on me about wasting food. Everybody at some point in their life has wanted to cut a watermelon with a sword, and now I have the opportunity, so I'm going to take it. Okay, let's see. Never done this before. I don't really know how to swing a sword. People put their hand behind their back when they do it, I think. Oh, wow. I really expected it to slow down more than that. Hardly felt it. How cool is that? Alright, got a piece of scrap 2x4. I just want to see if all the fittings are going to stay tight and hold up. Jeez. Guard's not loose. Bommel's not loose. I'd say that passed. So, there you go. One Viking sword. Viking style sword, I should say. Start to finish. Much happier with it than I am my last sword. The edge held up beautifully. All the fittings stayed tight. I'm out of paper, or I'd show you, but you'll just have to take my word for it. She's good and sharp. How you like that? She's no Ulfbert, but I'm pretty happy with it for my second sword ever. So, anyway, if you followed along with the whole project, thank you. Please like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. Always going to be more cool stuff coming. And if you got any suggestions for projects you'd like to see, or if you got any suggestions for names for the sword, drop them in the comments. They say all the best swords have names, but I can't think of one, so let's see what you guys got. Y'all take care.